lump of red gum.
You're going to tell us why and how this all came about.
Well, the Australian Plant Society has been part of our lives for a long time, and they wished to do something for the Australian Arid Lands Botanic Garden. And they thought of giving them a red gum seat, but it became difficult to find appropriate wood and didn't know whether it was really the most appropriate. So the curator-manager, Michael Anlazark, suggested that perhaps we could make a donations box for them and carve something on it. And so initially we had a sketch of 4 bits of wood nailed together and a sturt pea and a sand goanna. And I thought, I might just go a step further than that, maybe. And so after quite a lot of tripping around, I managed to find a red gum log from a very good friend down in Naracoorte, Evan Roberts. He's a woodcutter and a fellow enthusiast for the red-tailed black cockatoos. So I came home with this log. Now, it's not all just about a log, you know, you've got to have some thought processes here. So you've got to think about concepts. Michael particularly wanted a sand goanna and a sturt pea. Got our sturt pea. We'll show you something around the back in a minute. But you need to do some concept drawings, and there's a little sketch I carry around on occasion showing putting together animals that are interacting. Not just sitting on a perch looking at you, but they're doing things. And I think that's pretty special. A little bit like that. Yeah, you've got to start somewhere. So once you've got that together, you can start to have a look at what happens when you put it in three-dimensional. And so this was a little mock-up I made, turning around and you get some idea. There's creatures all the way around. So what do you do with the bare log, rough as, dead bark, cracks, plenty of borer holes, not quite sure how good it is once you get below the surface. Okay, I laid the log down on a couple of these stools and I got out my trusty draw knife, sharpened to a razor, and I tear all of the softwood off of the log. Well, nearly all. Here's some in here that doesn't matter because it's in a little crevice. And that is a magic tool. Nice clean cuts. So we've cleaned it up. Then the little circular motion guy here, I made a big one that actually wraps all the way around the log. And I think I've got a parrot here. It's a good time to talk about parrot. When the parrot's wrapped around the log, I come along with an electric drill and some very sharp bits, and I drilled holes all the way around in the bits that I didn't want, but only in about 25 millimetres. And so that happened to everything on this log. You had, looked like someone had a shotgun, but they'd missed the bits I wanted, so that was good. Sturt pea, South Australia's floral emblem. Pretty special plant, grows in the outback, particularly happy up at the Arid Lands Botanic Gardens. It has a funny lifestyle. It only comes up after big rains in the desert. And within 7 weeks or so it can come up to flower with these magic flowers with the standard, the boss, the keel, the little wings here. And then the plant produces seed pods and seed. Intricate little leaves here. If the water dries up, the plant dies. But hey, the job's done. It's got seed there for the next big rain. It might be 5 years' time. But the life process goes on. If there's plenty of moisture, sometimes they'll grow for more than 1 year. But mostly what we call an annual. The parrots up the top, well, I think the parrots and the outback go together. We see galahs and cockatoos and rosellas, all sorts of critters up here. Well, this is a pair of mulga parrots. Everything here has used an image of an animal or a bird or a plant to come up with a concept that can be fitted into a log. Not quite three-dimensional because it's somewhat flat.
And so all these animals and plants are found in the desert.
They're all found in the desert. Yep. And parrots are one of the most specky birds, big flocks of them at times in the desert country, around waterholes, morning and evening. So I've used a mulga parrot to tell us parrots are a big part of the desert life out there. Now if we rotate the log a little bit, we come around the side here and we've got a couple of creatures. These guys are long-tailed dunarts, very rare, very localised in central Western Australia. I think they just make wonderful characters. This guy up here has caught himself a grasshopper, and that's what their mulga parrots are turning their head to check up on what's going on over here. Up above there we've got a wattle. Now wattle is Australia's national plant, our national flower, right at the end of the season, but there's a sprig of golden wattle, Acacia pycnantha. This guy doesn't get quite up into the desert so much. This one was Acacia balladonervia, which only comes into the very top corner of South Australia. But it just had the flowers very much like the golden wattle, sitting in lovely little clusters that made a really good image that fitted into the shape of the grain of the wood very nicely. Underneath the dunart here we've got a little mound. This is a termite mound. He's actually sitting on top of it where he grabbed his grasshopper. This little guy's sniffing around the bottom, seeing what he can find to eat down there. And I think it's time to turn him a little bit more. And
it's heavy.
Here we come across, must be 200 kilograms. Here we come across a very interesting little group of creatures. Here's their termite mound, and here we have a sand goanna. His tail goes right up around. His back foot's actually hooked up in his tail. What's he doing? He may have been burrowing into the termite mound. She might have been burrowing into the termite mound because goannas lay their eggs in a nice little patch inside the nest of termites. And the termites rebuild the nest. When the eggs hatch, she comes along and digs a hole, and out they come. However, he's not alone. Down here we've got a spiky echidna, and he's got his nose sitting firmly across the front foot of the goanna. And the goanna can see his next meal may be. A couple of little possums got hold of his tail, playing funny beggars with him. But he can't get him because the echidna's helping him pin him down. And the echidna, well, he might have been digging a hole to eat the termites too. So that's life in the desert. Spin him around a little more. Around here we get into some more plants. This is an emu bush, Eremophila. It means desert loving. Wonderful plants, but mind you, in the dry they can look like sticks. Come a good rain, out come the leaves, buds, flowers. Can be fantastic. In fact, here I've got one, a slightly different one, but that's Eremophila georgii, and that's a grafted plant that we make in the nursery. That's the tag on it. So pretty specky tubular flowers. These guys are pollinated by insects because they've got a broad flower, a little landing petal at the bottom for an insect to land on. Well, they duck their head in to get some nectar and pollen, and they pollinate the plant. These guys are longer, more tubular, and they would be pollinated by birds with their long beaks, honey eaters poking their noses in. And we've got little holes in the leaves here. There must have been some grubs working. But I think the grubs were in the log because we had a little problem, the goanna's head, we had a little problem down here. That's life. I decided with all these little imperfections, look natural. If I stuck putty in there, I'd probably spread it everywhere and make it look gluggy. So we can live with natural. That's good, that's what life's all about. Down here, we've got a spinifex plant, a Triodia, prickly as. Very good habitat for little lizards and emu wrens. And these guys are foraging around the base partly disguised by the bush. Tail feathers look very much like the seed heads on the spinifex, and so they're busy doing their thing in amongst all these other animals. Now, we've almost got all the way around here. We'll just tip him a little bit more, leave the birds sitting there. We can see the mulga parrot and the sturt pea coming up again.
You didn't show us the real sturt pea though.
I didn't show you the real sturt pea. There we go. There's the sturt pea. This is one in the flesh. Out of the nursery. Here's his pod. He's starting to set seed. Whoops, a bit late. I'll have to join him back on. Lovely red flowers, black boss. Thought about burning it to make it black, but I was frightened I'd actually spoil it, so we'll run with that. And you see the leaves here represented. Everything here has its model in the wild, and the wood, lovely satiny crinkly grain, terrible thing to carve, but I'll tell you more about that in a minute. A lot of the angles that you fit, the angles, the birds' tails for example, are fitted like they are because they carve much more easily on an angle than straight up. The sturt pea stem goes straight up, and he's terrible because the grain's going every which way. The sturt pea stem's a little rough, so it's just finished up a bit rough, and that's fine. So that's our model. Put him down there where we can admire him.
So how did you do all this?
Well, I had all the holes drilled out when I put the paper on it. So then I had to work out the detail. Now, things like the Eremophila flower and the mulga parrot, they come very close together. It's a bit like mental gymnastics. Which bit sits on top of what? Does the bird's wing sit in front of the Eremophila leaves or the flowers? And so you're constantly thinking. One of my most useful tools was a simple gouge. And this guy's been used to create the background. And so this has been chiseled with a mallet or just pushed by hand up and down, sharpening it very, very sharp. This has got a real glow on the wood. The reason why it glows is because it's sharpened like a mirror finish. You can nearly see your face in that, with a very special stone. When that's like a mirror, the piece of wood that cuts is going to be like a mirror. And so when I saw that happening to this piece of wood, I decided I'm not going to use sandpaper. And so you look around here and you find on the parrots, everything's been cut with a flat chisel, carefully taking off fine wafers so the crooked grain doesn't tear, and you have little ripples, which is quite natural. The bird's feathers aren't all just perfectly smooth like sandpaper, so you get this little bouncy texture on the surface from the cuts. That I like. The finer detail on that, I made a little tool out of an old cutthroat razor. This used to have a blade coming out here, and it's what you would shave with in the olden days. Cutthroat razor. It's scary. I ground it down, I heated the end up and let it cool slowly to soften the steel. I ran a hacksaw blade through the middle of it, and then I got a little file and I filed it to get the centre little channel. There's a tiny little groove in there, and when it was about right, I heated it up red hot again, and at the right time I dipped it in water and pulled it out to cool it really quickly, and that made the steel all really hard again. That is beautiful steel, and that cuts absolutely beautifully. The fluting in the tail of the emu red, the texture of the feathers on the head, rough, rather bristly feathers on the head, feathers in the tail here, detailing in around the feet, all done with this. If you haven't got a tool, you make one. While we're going on that, I also used that tool on the lettering up the top here. And I made a paper band which I sat around there, and I traced the letters onto the wood. And then I put a simple line with this, cut in straight up the centre, and a little V in the top corners where the corners of the letter would be. And when I'd done that, grabbed my little sailmaker's needle holder with a little lino cutter blade in there. And I simply worked along the sides, going ping, 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 ping down the side, and come in from the other side. And when I finished, it was just a little bit chatty down the middle, so I grabbed my trusty cutthroat razor and I just run that gently up the middle to take the fibrousy little bits out of the way, and thought, that's not bad, but it just needed something else, so I just tweaked the corners of all the square lines. Come on, not too bad. Drawing the letters out probably took me 3 hours. Cutting them out probably only took me 1 hour. That's good. That was easy. That was easy. These guys, I think it took me